All right. In activity 1, what are the students doing?
Reading and responding.
Reading and responding. Oh. All right, it's Christmas time, y'all. Okay, so they're reading and responding. Okay. What is the teacher doing? Don't overthink it. So the teacher is just facilitating and monitoring, right? So the teacher is putting them in pairs so that they can do the reading. The teacher is asking the questions so they can do the discussing, right? So we don't have to overthink this. They are seriously just facilitating and monitoring this activity, okay? Take a look at the questions. What questions are we asking?
Who lived in the colonies? Where were the
Who lived?
Where were they?
Where were they? So what's the setting? Who are the characters? I know that's for a fictional story, but essentially that's what we're asking, right? Who and what are we talking about here? So the whole purpose of those questions is to simply what? Background knowledge. Let's set the context for what we're about to read. So if you notice, the first part of the activity is just setting the context for what we're about to read. The second activity is when we actually do the reading. Okay? And is this a core or an optional activity? Core. All right, let's look at activity 2. What are the students going to do? And I know you probably need a second to read through. Writing what?
Census.
Are they?
They're taking.
So they're transitioning a sentence into a note taking, right? So we're gonna take sentences and turn them into notes. Oh, that was supposed to be over here. Sorry. Okay, what is the teacher doing? What is she? Supporting. So she's just gonna support. And is this core or optional? Optional. What's the purpose? Why would I have kids turn perfectly good sentences into notes? Huh?
For
For the SPO. Yeah, because note taking is a skill they can use for the rest of their lives, right? When I go to a PD, I can assure you when I was a server, I did not, when you told me you wanted the chicken Alfredo and add shrimp, I didn't write chicken Alfredo, add shrimp. I wrote CHIX plus shrimp. ALF. That's note taking, right? Okay, let's look at activity 3. All right, what are the students doing?
Writing a response to a prompt.
Writing a response, okay. And what is the teacher doing? Monitoring. Yes, she's just facilitating, right? Okay, now look at the type of response kids are having to react to. What are they putting in their learning logs? Okay, but what's the question?
On this field about living in the colonies before Revolutionary War.
So explain how the colonists felt about living in the colonies before the Revolutionary War. And if you look at the teacher side, there's an anticipated response almost smack in the middle. And it says that colonists were proud to call England their mother country and were subjects of the King of England. So that's what we're looking for them to put in their learning log. Okay. I want you to keep that in mind. Is this core or optional?
Optional.
Optional. I'm gonna add that. Okay. Let's look at activity 4. What is the student gonna do here?
They're gonna read.
Read and respond. What are they responding to? The French and Indian War
Why anyone help us?
and the England's interaction or support within that war, right? So the American people at this time went to war with the French and Indians. We got this big thing happening, and we see England jump in to save the day, like daddy comes, right? So kids are discussing that. What is the teacher doing? Huh?
Supporting us, put that in question.
Supporting, asking questions, monitoring the reading, right? Yes. Y'all see how hard your teachers, how much your teachers overwork?
Yes.
Okay, is this core or optional?
Core.
Core. All right. Oh, y'all, it's a long lesson. Who picked this lesson? Let's look at activity 5. What is the student doing? They're doing the same thing that they did here, right? Sentences to notes. What is the teacher doing? Facilitating. Core or optional?
Optional.
Perfect. Let's go to 6. What is the students doing? Responding. What's the prompt?
Find a relationship.
Between colonist and king. Okay, what is the teacher doing? Facilitation, I think I heard. Okay, core or optional? Optional. And then 7. What are the students doing? Right, and they're just gonna start it. So they're gonna start the timeline. Okay, specific to what?
French and Indian War.
French and Indian War. What is the teacher doing? Modeling. Core or optional? Core. And then last activity. Activity 8. What are the students gonna do? Completing sentences. What is the teacher doing? Facilitating. Now look at the subordinating conjunction clauses there. What do you notice about them? It shows a timeline leading up to the French and Indian War. And it's specific between what? Relationships, the colonist and the king of England, right? So we're seeing here some direct choices, direct events taking place between the colonist and the king that could potentially give us information for this culminating task, right? Eventually, all right? Okay. That's a whole lot. And if I look at it like this, and I think everything is as equal importance, then I'm gonna get weeks and weeks behind, because wait, I forgot to ask, is this core or optional? Thank you, okay. So, you can see how easy it is to get off pace, right? If I think this entire lesson is meat, but there's gotta be side dishes to every lesson. So what we need to figure out is what's our meat, what's our main, and what's our side, okay? So go back to those first two questions. Those two look forwards on the very front. Where are students explaining the relationship between the colonist and the king before the American Revolution? Say it loud and proud.
1 and 3.
1 and 3, okay. But 3, we're just starting the context. 3 is when they're really gonna put it on paper, right? So activity 1, I'm setting the context and we're just reading for the information, but by the time we get to activity 3, you've got to put it on paper. So where's my meat? 3, what do you notice about activity 3? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Y'all, this is the 4th lesson in a week and a half where an optional activity was our success criteria. So, activity 3 is our meat. We cannot skip activity 3. Let me pause. How do we feel so far?
You have many teachers, they see optional, and they just automatically.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's optional, let's move, but do you see why we can't now, right? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Now, we need to go to activity 3 and actually map out what we expect to see in that learning log. When we think about success criteria, we want to be as detailed as possible. If I told you to write me in the first person point of view, whether the American Revolution was an act of truth or justified fight for freedom, I could probably answer that response very well in 1 paragraph, right? So what if I turn in a 1 paragraph essay and my peer turns in a 7 paragraph essay? What are we now? Not saying it would happen, but what could happen?
Along the one, you think that's the one that's the most well written, just because of the length of it.
That's right. So we start measuring performance based on what we think is the top, and we start grading based on length or structures versus based off of the content that we should be measuring, right? So we want to be explicit with our students. I want a 5 paragraph essay. This is what I expect to see in each one of these paragraphs, right? When I grade TJ's papers, I tell him, I better have 1 positive in every single paragraph. I better have a descriptive word in every single paragraph. These are things I expect to see from him. So I'm telling him. So then when I grade his paper, I say, I don't see a descriptive word. Go fix that piece, right? But he understands that expectation. So that's what we need to do for our students as well. A part of direct instruction is explicitly communicating, clearly communicating with our students what we want from them, okay? So let's look at activity 3. And we're gonna decide our success criteria. So they're gonna write in their learning log. Writing in their learning log how the colonists felt about living in the colonies before the Revolutionary War. So when I take their learning log, what is going to let me know they got it?
Have a piece of
Never heard that sound in County Fair School, I didn't know what kind of lockdown we were about to go on. Okay, so they have to have a feeling word. Okay. What else do they have to have?
evidence from the text.
Evidence. How many pieces of evidence? Okay, let's define it. What is our expectation? Let's just say for master, just for master. At least 2 text evidences. Does everybody agree? Now, in those text evidences, do they need to be directly quoted or summarized? Are we paraphrasing text evidence or are we quoting text evidence? Huh? At least summarized, right? Paraphrase. Why, Ms. Thomas? It's the standard. Direct quotes isn't happening until 6th grade. We looked it up. It came up in conversation. Parenthetical citations. Yeah. Okay, so we have to have at least 2 summarized pieces of text evidence. What else? You want a complete sentence? Okay, so complete sentence. And I had somebody say cups. I'm not sure what that means, but I think it's capitalization, punctuation. I'm not sure what the U and the S stand for. What? Usage and spelling. Usage and spelling. Okay, but I liked this for her success criteria because she had already taught that to the kids. So instead of writing out capitalization, usage, punctuation, she just put cups, and so there's 4 pieces of success criteria that is in a note taking, right? All right, so we have to have at least 1 complete sentence that tells a filling word. Well, really, we're gonna have to have how many complete sentences? 2 to 3, right?
Yes.
Because I could technically say the filling word in 1 text evidence in 1 sentence, but by the time I stick that second text evidence, unless I'm an incredibly craftful writer, I've now created a run-on, right? So we have to have at least 2 to 3 complete sentences using all these things. We have to have at least 1 filling word and 2 text evidences that support that filling word. So now, when little Bobby turns in his paper and he has a filling word and 1 text evidence, I'm clearly taking a point based on something that right? So I'm not measuring him to my advanced student. I'm measuring him to the success criteria.
Right.
Right? So if the student was able to do I figured out the filling word, I have beautiful sentences, I didn't give a piece of evidence. What do I work on with that kid?
Evidence.
Relevant details within the text, okay? What if I wrote 3 sentences that had nothing to do with the relationship between the king and the colonist? What does that kid need?
Word support.
We just need more support understanding the concept, right? Okay. So this will also help us to know what our next steps are with that kid. We're not just shooting in the air trying to figure out where did this kid go wrong. I know exactly where this kid went wrong. Let's say I have a filling word and I have great text evidence. I can't read a lick of what you put on there. Subject verb agreement is all over the place. It literally looks like you sent me a text message when you were half asleep, right? What am I working on? Sentence structure, right? Do you see how much that simplified the conversation moving forward? Okay, we feeling good? So we have our success criteria. Now, what I did for you guys as far as the activity itself, because of time, I drew you to the anticipated response. You would want them to go ahead and write out what you expect. I also included in the folders the note-taking from 2 of the 2 optional activities and the timeline already filled out, so that was one less thing. But if we were taking those as a grade, just like in math, we would want them to complete the work, right? When we have them complete the work, it helps them to stamp out what they did to get to the end product that they want. Okay. Now we're gonna go through each activity and we're gonna decide how we support students. Within that conversation.
Yeah.
Oh. My buzz look terrible, y'all. You didn't tell me I look like Cindy Lou Who. Okay. Within our conversation, we're gonna decide, do we skip the optional, do we keep the optional? Now, what I would tell you guys is make sure that you have the conversation with your director, right? Around how the optional activities need to be done. So I'm just stepping out for a second. It might be that the only lessons that we're allowed to skip optional activities are the lessons we plan together. Until this process is so fluid, our teachers are making these decisions, because if not, we skip the most important parts, right? And we spend too long on the things that don't matter. Or so really think about where your teachers are as a whole and the decisions that need to be made with this part of the lesson planning process. Would y'all agree? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's look at activity 1. This is a core activity, so we for sure can't skip it. But we can very easily put in some supports, okay? The very first part is just setting the context, the background knowledge for the read. Do I need to do anything to support students with this? Huh?
Depends.
On what?
Maybe.
What was lesson 1 about?
They need a review of the background knowledge.
Okay. So do I need to go further into the background knowledge? Okay. Say that again, Mr. Moser?
I was saying you have a discussion with them beforehand after they read it.
Yes, so we're discussing before they read. Specific to who lived in the colonies, where were the colonies, why were the colonies important to England? So if the kids don't know those, I might need to just tell them. Not a lot of kids are gonna come with that information. American Revolution is not something we talk about in our homes on a regular basis, at least not me, right? What else could I do for the kids just within this small piece to help them?
After they discuss with their partner, it could be whole grade, so that they can get the knowledge.
Okay, so, or maybe I just do a whole group discussion no matter what, right? So if I have some war loving kids, because we do got some kids that love war, they know all about it. We could probably do some partner discussion, but if I know my kids generally don't understand this time period, maybe I just adjust the grouping here. Instead of doing a partner discussion, we just do a whole group discussion, right? So we could adjust the grouping. And we might even put up like an anchor chart. Right? I also see here a really good opportunity to support the decoding of the words that they're gonna see throughout this entire unit. If I define colony as a settlement, a place in which a group of people created like a neighborhood, and I give that to you, and then I tell you that IST is a suffix meaning a person who, then you know a colonist is a person who lived in the colony, right? So I can build some morphology instruction into that that would support your ownership of the words that you're gonna see. That might be something I could quickly add in to support my kids, right? I could do the anchor chart, really defining who the colony is, maybe even pull up a map so that they can see England in respects to the northeast and where they settled, right? So that we can see that how that traveling happened. So those might be all ways that I can help kids, right? Like when I showed my son a picture of Denmark, he understood the Holocaust, when the Holocaust was happening and they were fleeing into Sweden in the boats. Like I showed him Denmark and I showed him Sweden, and he was like, oh, well, that makes sense why they would go to Sweden. It was like right there, like it was an easy travel, right? It was quick and they could get out of danger pretty fast, right? So that helps students to make those connections. So just pulling up a map and pointing that out on the map could help. Yes, ma'am.
And couldn't you also in your whole group do a KWL, something to see what their background knowledge is?
I love it, yes. And we could add to that KWL throughout the entire unit.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And that's gonna help us to direct the conversation as well. Very nice. Okay, now what about for the reading part of this activity?
I pull up small group. I mean, it means that. Off my classical plan,
Yes, yes. So I could pull the kids that are struggling with fluency or just struggle to decode. So even though it says to partner read, I can have some kids partner reading while the rest of the kids come to a small group with me, right? Now, should the teacher be reading for the kids? No, so what is she gonna do in that small group to help them? Corrective feedback in the moment. We could preview words from the text before we ever read it to support the fluency. We could do closed reading where I read half the sentence and you finish the sentence and I read, then you read, right? Because pacing is an issue here as well. So if they're struggling through this passage, 15 minutes for a discussion plus a read might be pushing it, all right? Okay. And then you'll notice it says, some guiding questions. This one only has one guiding question, but those guiding questions during a read is simply to help the kids learn how to monitor their thinking while they read. Some kids are already doing that. Some kids need you to intentionally stop and ask the question so that they can think, oh, I probably should have thought about that while I was reading, right? So the purpose of those guiding questions within a read is to teach them to monitor what they're thinking about while they read. Remember, K2, I'm learning to read. 3-5, I'm transitioning to read to learn. So it's not like it's gonna happen overnight. You've got to teach them how to use reading as a tool to learn. Okay, good. I'm trying to. All right, let's look at activity 2. So in this activity, they're taking the sentences and turning them into notes. And it's an optional activity. Do I skip it? Do I keep it?
I've got a thought on this.
Yeah, give me your thought.
So you rank your optional activities in order from most important to least important. Then activity 1, to do it in a meaningful way, it's probably gonna take more than 15 minutes.
Correct.
So if I go 5 over, I'm gonna lose my least important optional if it's 5, or if I go 10 over, then I gotta lose 2 5s or 1 10, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna check time after activity 1, and then look and see where this one ranks on if it's higher or lower.
Yeah, so that's a good point, right? I'm probably gonna need this 5 minutes for that first activity, which is more important, right? What else? And I like the idea of ranking them.
It depends on your students, because you may have 3 different classes and one really needs it and not have time, and another one needs something a little bit more. So it really, it's kind of hard to say. It depends on the.
It depends on the data, yes. So this should be this whole conversation should be very student driven, right? What do my kids need? Do my kids need this, right? Now, I want you to think about this. If I said, let's skip it, what do you think my number 1 reason for skipping it is? Because it's coming again
Later.
at the end. I'm doing this same exact activity with 3 different sentences in activity, or 2 different sentences in activity 5.
examples, these sentences are really the things we just talked about. Model it as an example when you're doing your KWL chart or whatever,
Mhm.
and just mention it and move on.
That's a good point. So what Ms. Irwin is saying is that the sentences from activity 2 are pretty much your answers to activity 1. So what if I wrote it out as a note take while the kids are discussing it, I note take it and then have them say the sentence, right? So that way I'm still modeling note taking. And then they do it as themselves in activity 5, right?
I mean, early finisher activity after they finish their.
If you get finished with your reading, right? Because I know I'm gonna have kids that need 15 minutes to read that paper, and some of those kids are gonna read it in 2.5. And be able to tell you exactly what it said, right? So it could be an early finishers, if you get finished reading and discussing before I am finished, then I want you to do this activity book page. That's an option. I do know by this time, note-taking has been a part of their daily instruction multiple times. How do you think I know that without looking at the scope and sequence? It's optional and there's no model. There's no teacher model, which means that this has been modeled by the teacher a dozen times. Because if y'all seen these guidebook lessons, the first 10 times we work on a skill, there's a teacher model, right? Your teachers hate the teacher models because they're out of context. So when they come to you and say, this it doesn't because it's the model, right? So since there's no model and it's optional, I know that this had to have been modeled a dozen times prior. Okay, so we have some options here. We could skip. We could do an early finisher. Again, these are just options. This is going to be driven by student data and time. Okay, let's look at activity 3. So they're going to work with a partner to discuss the prompt first, and then they're going to write the prompt, and we've given them success criteria, which y'all is actually a core support. Success criteria is a way in which we can scaffold mastery of an objective, right? So that right in itself is a support that we put in place because we clearly outline what we want you to do. But let's think about a little bit further. Is there any other supports I want to put in place here? Or that I could put in place?
School and other small group to redirect any form of support.
Yep, so we could do a small group. Where I can make sure that that conversation is focused on what it needs to focus on. That is
really high group, you could do the opposite and not do partners and have it be
independent. Mhm. So this might need to be an independent activity first. So adjusting those groupings. Anything else? There's not a whole lot for this activity, nor is there a lot that we would want to put in because I'm going to assess your learning. So I don't want to hold your hand so much that you give me the answer because I make sure you gave me the answer, right? I want to see if you truly got it. But I would say in this case, those guiding questions are gold, right? And we can be intentional with our guiding questions. In most cases, we use those guiding questions for everyone. But if I know Amanda is going to need the basic recall before I can get her to this analysis of the relationship, maybe I'm specific in asking her one of those guiding questions, right? So I'm going to make sure to ask this question to this friend because it's going to help her get where she needs to be. Okay.
Shannon.
Yes, ma'am.
This kind of came up in conversation yesterday
Okay.
at school. A lot of the activities in the stat books are like in a partner or, so it's real hard for the teachers when they're grading to determine.
Who did the work?
The grades aren't really reflecting where the students are because it's so much that's not independent. So we're just having an issue, cause I know like this one is with a partner, but we're having an issue really having the grades reflect what the students can do independently.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring out. So a couple of things that I would say with that is don't be afraid to adjust the grouping. Now, I would not remove the discussion piece because discussion is the vehicle to writing, right? So the more we talk, the better we write sometimes. I guess it depends on what we're talking about and how we're talking. But nonetheless, we could do the partner discussion and then go independent for the right, which I think is the intention for that activity. There are times where we just need to make it independent.
I think they're just afraid to, change
They're in their first year of implementation. It's completely natural for them to be afraid to step out of the script, but it is okay if necessary. So in that case, they're just gonna annotate the adjusted grouping. The other thing I would say is, even within a small group assignment, there's ways that we can hold each kid accountable. So for example, every kid has to write something on the paper and they each have a different color, and then they write their name in that color. So that way, if Shannon is blue and there ain't nothing blue worth looking at on this paper, then I know Shannon didn't get it. So that's one way. There's a couple of other ways that you can hold everyone accountable for that group's work. So it might just be kind of like tapping into those Kagan structures to pull out some of those accountability pieces. Yeah. Great question though, because I know that's been brought up across teachers in all clusters. Lots of partner work. How do I truly assess?
And you could turn that into like a consensus map where everyone writes their own independent response. But then they have to discuss the 4 responses and then come to a consensus and write the best response. And then you can take an assessment of all 4 of their independently, but then they've also made a correction to their writing and really thought through a response to make it better before you're even involved. So that's a good way to do it, is to have them each write their own independently and then really discuss as a group, correct themselves, their own punctuation, make those corrections, do a consensus and then share out, but you still would assess their independent portion. So that would hold everybody accountable.
I like that too. So if, I'm actually gonna point out one of the teachers that I saw at Fairfield. She has them do writings in a Google Doc. And then they go in and they use the comment feature to give each other feedback, but she can still see what the student said prior to changing it after receiving feedback from a peer. So, I like that idea as well.
And if you use Cammy, it records who's doing what as well.
Who's doing what? Yeah, we Scott.
I was just gonna say that when they do group work or partner work, you can also have the students do a reflection. And the teacher can gear those reflection questions for them, so she can get enough information to know that each of them learned something from that group discussion.
Yeah, that's a great idea as well. Or like even just saying like, what did your partner say? Tell me what your partner said, right? If it's a partner discussion, which would be that same idea of a reflection, yeah. Oh, my partner didn't actually say anything. So, well, right, very good. So lots of different ways. I'm not sure that there's one way that better fits. I think it's gonna depend on the teacher, the kids, and the activity. Great question. All right, let's look at activity 4. So we're going to read an activity 4, read and discuss. Any supports I'm gonna put in place here? Small group, I think I heard. So I could do another small group. Anything else I might wanna do here?
I think the same supports from the last activity, it is like reading on those vocabulary.
Yeah, like what words do I need to pull out of the text to preview and define before we read, right? So do you need to add any word study pieces here? Okay. All right, let's go to activity 5. So we're doing note catching, and it's optional. Am I gonna skip or keep? And why?
The first one.
Depends on my decision for the first one, my student data, and my pacing, right? Because this is another 5-minute activity that I could use to really support around reading fluency, add in, those partner supports or the, supports for whole group discussion and partner reads. So a lot is gonna go into whether I skipped it or not. But here's the other option. Let's say I choose to keep this. My kids really need support with note taking. And I get here and I really need this 5 minutes because I thought that other activity was only gonna take me 20 and it actually took me 25. And so I really need this time. I could take this and easily make it the bell ringer for tomorrow. And that's one less thing I have to prepare. We would not want to do that with TWR activities that are core. But when they're optional like that, it's a great opportunity to put it as an exit ticket or waiting on buses to get called or in the morning as that bell ringer piece. That way we're not skipping it. We're just using it in more intentionally so that we don't have to skip it. All right, activity 6. What are we doing? We're discussing. What are we discussing?
Relationship between the colonists and the king.
Relationship between the colonist and the king. And it's optional. Does this activity look familiar to you? It is exactly mirrored to activity 3. The only difference here is activity 3 focused around the first text. Activity 6 is focused around the second text. Right? So we could do a couple of things here. We could go back to our success criteria, and now I have one more piece that I can pull in this lesson. Right? And I don't have to change my success criteria because it's the same question. The only thing that changed was the text. Because we looked at 2 different texts in this unit. Activity 3 was on the first one, activity 6 is the second one. Same success criteria. Therefore, we could do the same supports, right? Pulling that small group if necessary. But now I have another option to pull and use to monitor student learning. Why would I not skip it?
Cause it's tied
It's
to the
directly tied to the culminating task and to the, Mr. Moser, you said it, the student local course, right? Again, the only difference here is we're using a second text. All right, and then let's finish with activity 8. Oh, sorry, I skipped 7. I don't know how to count. And I did put the timeline in your packet. It's the last page. Students are completing the timeline, but they're only completing the very first row that you see on that timeline where it says the French and Indian War. And what do you notice about that timeline and that particular event? So how did the king help the colony? So it shows a direct impact of relationship there. It's also the very first time that they've ever completed this timeline. What do you think this timeline is going to be used for? It ends up being like a 3-page timeline. What am I going to use it for? The culminating writing test, because here's my reasons why I'm gonna say it was treason, because that king stuck his neck out for you, right? I'm just coming up with it, but y'all get what I'm saying, all right? So if this is the very first time they see this timeline, and I know that this timeline can be used for that culminating task, what do I need to do for this particular activity? It needs to be a model. Now, it can be a guided model where I'm asking questions and the students are answering. But this is the one time where you're copying from the board, right? So I might be engaging you in discussion and formulating your responses correctly for you, putting them on the timeline, and then you're putting it on your paper. Because now I've just modeled to you the success criteria, what I expect to see on every single event afterwards on that timeline. All right, and then last activity, activity 8. What are we doing? Completing sentence stems. Do I need to add any supports? Okay, so I could model the first. So I could do a gradual release. I could ask those guiding questions, right? Any other thoughts, suggestions? Review conjunctions first. Review complete sentences.
Well, the structure of the sentence.
Oh, yeah. So just what does it look like to have a complete sentence with that subordinating conjunction clause, right? So we might need to do a quick review there, and it's a 15-minute activity, so we got more than enough time to do a review. Okay, this was fast and furious, right? But you also saw where I didn't leave you in a place to overthink it. Ask the question and move on. Like if we get to this place on the teachers and students where we're overthinking what the teacher is doing, we're in a bad place, right?